In this video, we are going to discuss logical fallacies, how to spot them, and how to avoid using them yourself. If you understand these properly, then you will be absolutely formidable when it comes to debating. And for each of the logical fallacies that we discuss in this video, I'm going to show you an example of it in practice. So with that, let's get into the first one. Appeal to authority. An appeal to authority is when somebody tries to add credibility to their argument or tries to win a debate by citing an expert in the field, someone that agrees with their position, or when they bring up their own pedigree, whether it be their education or their job, career, or anything else like that. But the key to this is that when they bring it up, they don't actually say what the argument is, and they don't actually present a better argument. They just say, well, that person agrees with me, or, well, I'm a doctor. Just because an expert agrees with you or you have a qualification of some sort doesn't make you right. Now, the appeal to authority is something that very often happens in heated political discussions about complicated topics that have widely been studied. And this clip is a very obvious example of this in practice.
What is your formal education background? I guess a lot of people don't know what your undergraduate degree was in.
So I was at UCLA in political science and then Harvard Law School.
Okay. So you don't have, you wouldn't consider yourself an expert in sociology?
I mean, I don't consider sociology a particularly expert field, but go ahead.
What I'm getting at is that you're not considered an expert in sociology, psychology, gender studies, lesbian dance theory, many of these things that you've brought up tonight.
I know a lot more about all those others than lesbian dance theory. As far as, if you want to take issue with the argument, I would urge you not to use the argument from authority, which is somebody has a PhD by their name, they know what they're talking about. That's a dumb argument.
What I'm trying to get at is that the fact that you have any other further education in any of these topics or any of these fields of study.
I don't need a 7-year degree in sociology, no bullshit when I hear it.
You guys know that I love to keep you armed and dangerous when it comes to debating in your own personal life. And if you're enjoying this content and you want to see more, then leave me a comment. Also, chuck a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on all those notification bells so that you never miss a beat.
You're also offering kind of an unqualified opinion on a lot of these topics.
See, again, you're just making the argument from authority. I don't think slapping a PhD from Ferris State next to your name makes you an expert in all things in the field in which you propose to speak. Okay, the fact is that either my argument's good or my argument's bad. Citing to my credentials is a really bad way of making an argument.
So Ben calls that out perfectly there. The guy tried to say that he doesn't have a degree in these fields, so he's not qualified to talk about it, which is absolute nonsense. He didn't actually provide a logical reason as to why Ben's point of view is wrong, or why there is a better stance to take. And the next one we're going to discuss is a false equivalence. Now, a false equivalence is when somebody tries to compare two things that are not equal. This is often done in a debate when somebody is trying to make their opponent's point look a lot worse than it is and exaggerate the seriousness of what they're talking about. See if you can spot it in the following clip.
I'm talking about the fact that I'm faculty here. I also support a protester in the back.
What do you support specifically? Do you think that anti-immigrant rhetoric is violent free speech?
Yes, because of the reasons
you think that
I'm
speech is
about.
violence?
No, I think that
that's what that sign says.
The conversation that you're having is oppressive.
So I am oppressing people by what I'm doing. So I am exerting violence on people by my speech. That's what the sign says, and that's what you just said.
It contributes to.
And the protester is saying that's exactly what I'm doing, and she's saying that's exactly what her sign means. So that means that you, a faculty member at an American public university, paid for by taxpayer dollars, are conflating speech with violence.
Yes. Speech can be violent. What you are saying contributes to systemic racism in this country. It means that my students of color are pulled over and accused of stealing a car when they did not.
I'm not pulling anybody over for stealing
I'm
any
not
cars.
saying that you
I see many
personally
people
did.
of many different races in this room. They all seem to be doing just fine. I don't think any of them have felt violence because they listened to a lecture on basic facts about our immigration system.
Now, as you just saw, this person who is supposedly a professor, which God help us all if that is the case, compared speech with violence. Now, speech and violence are manifestly different things, and to compare the two in this context is completely absurd. And obviously, Michael Knowles smashed that out of the park, but you can see what the professor was trying to do there. He was trying to conflate Michael Knowles' speech with the far more emotionally triggering word violence, and trying to somehow conflate the consequences of those two actions, when in reality, they're different by definition and by legal definition. And the professor deep down knows this. Everybody already knows that those two things are not the same, but she knows that she can't argue with Michael Knowles' speech. So she tries to use this terrible logical fallacy to try and add weight and credibility to her argument. Next one we're going to discuss is a straw man. Now, a straw man is when somebody misrepresents one's argument intentionally in order to try and paint their point of view in a certain light that is easier to attack and that makes them look bad. The straw man fallacy is used all the time in debates. If you ever watch the Kathy Newman and Jordan Peterson interview, which I can't play because of copyright, Kathy Newman commits so many straw man fallacies, it's not even funny, constantly saying, so what you're saying is this, and what you're saying is that, when he never said that. And it's a pretty easy logical fallacy to observe and call out, and also a very important one to be able to observe and call out. Because if you don't call it out, and if somebody continually strawmans you, then you will end up arguing in favor of something that you never said, and probably something that you don't believe. And it can happen in multiple ways, sometimes in a more subtle way where people actually don't understand what you're saying and you just have to correct them. But it can also happen in a more sinister way where somebody intentionally takes what you're saying and paints it in a bad light in order to make you look bad and in order for it to make it much easier to debate you. And if this does happen to you, then you know that you've probably got a pretty good point, because they don't want to argue the real point, so they're going to just create this straw man. Now check out Malcolm Gladwell doing this to Matt Taibbi.
Once the commercial strategy of the news business was to go for the whole audience, everyone from your crazy right-wing uncle to the sulking lefty teenager in the corner. Gallup polls twice showed Walter Cronkite to be the most trusted person in all of America. That would never happen with a newsreader today.
I was greatly amused by the affection Matt Taibbi has for the age of Walter Cronkite, which he seemed to hold up as a kind of golden moment. In that moment, the mainstream media was populated entirely by white men from elite schools. Why you would have had such affection and say that's the gold standard? I was astonished to listen as Matt Taibbi doubled down on his defense of Walter Cronkite. Elite white, as it turns out, journalists, some of them, the ones that Matt seems to have such affection for.
Now, as you can see there, Malcolm Gladwell is trying to paint Matt Taibbi as a guy who's longing for the 1950s where people were excluded. And it's a very obvious and a pretty sinister straw man, because what he's trying to do is he's trying to argue the fact that Matt Taibbi is somehow a racist, rather than arguing for the point at hand in the debate, which was that the mainstream media can't be trusted, which they can't. And that's why he went for the straw man. The next one is an appeal to emotion. An appeal to emotion is often used in a debate when somebody wants to paint their opponent as somehow uncaring or unfeeling. And unfortunately, this can be a very, very effective technique and something that's often used, and especially with the climate change narrative, because a lot of people tend to react to things with their emotion rather than logic. And if you're speaking to a certain demographic of people that are likely to do that, then you can use this logical fallacy to win them over. And check out this clip to see a climate activist doing just that.
And this is what is allowing people to get extended life expectancy, because they've got more certainty of food. And this all depends on cheap energy, which has come from fossil fuels.
Jacob, you have 6 children. Do you not care about their future? Do you not care about them being able to feed themselves? Because right now, under this government's policies, your 6 children are heading towards a future that is filled with life-threatening extreme weather events, crop failures, famine, war. Suffering on a scale completely unimaginable. 7.5 million British people live in fuel poverty. Parents are starving themselves so that they can feed their children, and people are freezing to death in their homes because they are forced to choose between heating and eating. People are dying. Are you hearing me?
Now, obviously, this appeal to emotion came at a time when Jacob Rees-Mogg, who was interviewing her, was presenting facts and logic and absolutely destroying her in the debate. So then she said, why don't you care about your children? Do you want your children to die, basically, and that people are dying everywhere? Don't you care? And you can see why some people might see that and think, oh my God, I don't want people to die and I don't want children to have a bad future. But in reality, it's a shockingly manipulative technique. And if you ever see this in practice, then now you know to call it out straight away. Next, we're going to have a look at the anecdotal fallacy. This is when somebody takes an aspect of their own life experience and tries to use that to make a general point. In other words, this is when somebody tries to make the exception prove the rule. And we all know that the exceptions never prove the rule. Just because you experienced a certain thing doesn't disprove the general rule. And here's a recent example of this happening.
You've asserted that no one would ever see me as a woman, that nobody would ever see or could see a transgender person as a woman, and yet I have dozens of friends from diverse backgrounds, women from the reservation, a woman from Japan, several immigrant women. I have my coworkers, I have my boss, my VP, my CEO, all respecting me as a woman, my family, my long-term friends who are actually here with me. All of these people assure me, like, I'm a woman. They'll tell me, girl, like, there is no way you are a man. They see me as a woman. So the question, how can you assert that nobody would ever see me as a woman when my material experience tells me you're wrong?
As you can see, the argument was, in my own personal experience, people have told me that I'm a woman, so therefore I am a woman. Just because you had that certain life experience doesn't make it true. Other examples of this can be seen if somebody was to say, I'm a woman and I was paid less at a job than a man. Therefore, the gender pay gap exists. Next one we're going to be looking at is the no true Scotsman fallacy. The no true Scotsman fallacy is when somebody attempts to refute evidence that runs counter to their presupposition or generalization by claiming that the example presented doesn't represent the group in question. So the name no true Scotsman kind of says it all. If there was an example presented of somebody doing something that wasn't very Scotsman-like, then the person would say, well, no true Scotsman would ever do that. And this is a fallacy that can often be seen when people are trying to defend their own groups. When presented with evidence of clear behavioral divergence from their stated values and beliefs, they will be quick to use the no true Scotsman fallacy. Check out Joe Biden doing it in this clip.
Listen, you got to come see us when you come to New York, VP Biden.
I will.
It's a long way until November. We got more questions.
You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
So what he's basically saying is that no true black person wouldn't vote for me. And other examples of where this can be found is when somebody says, well, that wasn't real Marxism. No real Marxist would act in that way. Joseph Stalin wasn't a real Marxist. Mao wasn't a real Marxist. Next one is ad hominem. Now, ad hominem attacks, which mean against the man, is an argument that is directed at the person rather than the position that they are asserting. This is used when somebody is trying to undermine the credibility or the character of their opponent in a debate, and is most often found when somebody is losing a debate. Kind of like when someone's back's up against the wall, they just start swinging wild haymakers. Often these come in the form of ad hominems in a debate. Unfortunately though, this is another one that can be very effective to the untrained eye. Insulting and demoralizing your opponent is a cheap way of winning points in a debate, and it also allows somebody to avoid engaging in an intellectually rigorous debate and actually arguing the point. Check out this clip of Trump doing it.
For most of his life, he has described himself as very pro-choice and as a supporter of partial birth abortion. Right now, today, as a candidate, he supports federal taxpayer funding for Planned Parenthood. I disagree with him on that. That's a matter of principle, and I'll tell you. You are the single biggest liar. You probably are worse than Jeb Bush. You are the single biggest liar. All right. This guy lied. Let me just tell you, this guy lied about Ben Carson when he took votes away from Ben Carson in Iowa, and he just continues. This guy will say anything. Nasty guy. Now I know why he doesn't have one endorsement from any of his colleagues. All right, John.
Now, love him or hate him, guys, he is a logical fallacy machine. But with him, it really worked for him. And I hate to say that because I don't like logical fallacies, even though I do like Trump. But throughout his presidential campaign, you saw him calling Little Marco Rubio, and Lying Ted, and Crooked Hillary. These were all intentional logical fallacies that worked like an absolute charm for him. I would not recommend it though. Always avoid ad hominem attacks. And the last one we're going to talk about is circular reasoning. Circular reasoning is when somebody uses the subject of the question to answer the question. And this is very often used when somebody is asked to define something. Either they lack the knowledge or wherewithal to actually define what they were asked to define, or it will poke a hole in their ideological stance, so they avoid doing it with circular logic. And this is something that can be extremely frustrating in a debate, or just to hear. It's just frustrating to hear. And here are two examples of this happening.
I have answered the question. You stood up here and said trans women are women.
Yes.
Tell me what you mean. What is a woman?
Womanhood is something that, just as Ethan explained, I cannot define because I am not
But
myself.
you used the word, so what did you mean when you said trans women are women if you don't know what it means?
Right? So here's the thing. So I do not define what a woman is because I do not identify as a woman. Womanhood is something that is an umbrella term. It includes people
That describes what?
People who identify as a woman.
Identify as what?
As a woman.
What is that?
Was to each their own.
You talked about the importance of defining racism, but I, unless I missed it, which is possible, I didn't hear your personal definition. Is there one that you would offer us? Like, how do you define racism?
Sure. So racism, I would define it as a collection of racist policies that lead to racial inequity that are substantiated by racist ideas.
As you can see with the Matt Walsh example, it's one that would just go round and round and round and round in a never-ending circle. And with the Ibram X. Kendi example, you can't use the word racist when you're trying to define racism. That is a criminal example of a circular definition that he just committed there. What he just said was equivalent to if somebody asked you, what is a dog? And you were to answer something with dog-like characteristics. It makes absolutely no sense. And if you guys want to get at me on social medias or join the Rattlesnake community on Locals or any of that good stuff, hit those links in the bio in the comments. If you guys want to watch another video, click right here. Until next time, I'm Jake. This is Rattlesnake TV, keeping you armed and dangerous.